Hi and welcome to another Huddle Breakdown Extra Time. I'm your host Martin Murphy and joined as ever by Alan and by James. We've got another special guest on this week, which is a great feature for this particular show. We've got Gavin MacPhee, who's an Aberdeen fan and fellow data analyst and enthusiast. Gavin, would you like to say a little bit about yourself and where any interested parties, and I'm sure there'll be many, can maybe find some of your output?
Okay, first of all, thanks guys for having me on. My name's Gavin MacPhee. I'm a kind of Aberdeen supporter, as you say. I write about the Dons on AFC1903.com. It's a web blog, Substack, whatever you want to call it, that I kind of started up earlier this year. Also written a book about the history of the early years of the European Cup from 55 to 1969. So covered Celtic, obviously, in that. And you can find me on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it at AFC 1903 Analysis.
God bless you for missing out the Feyenoord final in 1970, Gavin. That's a big thumbs up already, my friend. Stand free, stand free.
No problem.
Gavin, also you said it was AFC 1903, so that's really handy for anybody who's looking for your PIN number. It's either that or 1983, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. we won't go down the train spotting references. Yeah.
Listen, that was a documentary, Train Spotting too. There was a lot of truth in that. If I could maybe kick off a little bit, please, Gavin, before Alan and James maybe pose a few questions. Really terrific start, you know. I mean, it's really like back to the future at the moment, you know. Aberdeen and Celtic in full points, a top of the table clash, 3 p.m. kickoff on a Saturday. We're just waiting for soccer casuals and me making it up to the North Stand top tier in my slip-on shoes. So really kind of 1980s feel to it, thank goodness. One of my favourite periods. But I wondered really about the transformation in Aberdeen's fortunes. I'm presuming that with your previous managers, there wasn't an obvious knock-on from what they had put in place, like Neil Warnock and so forth. So the work that Jimmy Thielen has put in from the outside seems to be really, really effective. I wondered, first of all, what your thoughts were on the impact that he's had.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you probably could say that Peter Leven has, there's been a bit of a follow-on from his tenure. Obviously, he was, took over at the end of last season and he kind of got us back to basics, I would say, and was, added a little bit more bravery on the ball, as you guys probably saw in the games. It was a 1-1. It was the first one. Well, that was pre-Warnock, 1-1, right? And then obviously the semi-final, the 3-3 game. So, yeah, I mean, and this unbeaten run stretches back actually to last season. But in terms of Thielen, obviously, I think it's gone better than. I mean, well, it couldn't have gone any better, really. So he's had a big impact. Obviously, I think one of the biggest things is the kind of feel good factor around the club and the team, and there's just a belief that he has a track record. Obviously in the Swedish league, but it's still a decent enough track record that there's a kind of faith that this might, not just be a flash in the pan, right? Now, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about some of the underlying things that would suggest that this might not be sustainable. But in terms of kind of forward momentum of the club and looking forward to the next, the remainder of the season, the next few years, I think there's a kind of trust in there that he is going to be the man for the job. And we obviously had that amazing 8 or 9 games with Barry Robson at the end of the 2023 season. But he didn't necessarily have the kind of background and history there to suggest that was anything more than kind of maybe a good bit of momentum at the right bit of time. And I think Thielen has got a bit more than that about him.
And you see the difference in confidence with the players, and I'm presuming the way he's been coaching them as well. You're looking at, what was it, 8 players in international duty from Aberdeen, just in the recent international break at one level or another. And, you look at people like Mackenzie and Devlin especially with Scotland and what they've achieved. I'll hand it over to you just now, Alan, to maybe dig a little bit deeper with Gavin.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of themes that we kind of kick around regularly on this show is one is around sort of underlying performance versus outcomes, and I think we'll get onto that a little bit. And then another key theme is the sort of the cult of manager, and really what impact does a manager have on a team versus other factors, the environment, the players, the system they're asked to play, etc., etc., etc. So, with those kind of thoughts in your mind, I mean, what can fans expect to see on Saturday? In terms of the way that Aberdeen are set up, what's different? What has he changed? How will they set up without the ball? How will they set up with the ball? How would you sort of characterise the way that you think they'll approach the game?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the interesting things I think right from the beginning with him is that he's never seemed like he's a kind of zealot in terms of this is exactly how I play, this is my identity. He's talked a lot about actually the opposition and what the opposition give you and adapting. And we were promised when he came in, or kind of we were told, was that this was going to be they were going to sit deep, they were going to hit teams on the break, there was going to be a lot of that. And obviously, the kind of immediate question there is, how do you do that against St Johnstone at home? How do you sit deep if the other team's sitting deep, or if you've got all the ball or whatever? And clearly, what surprised me is how much, based on that. I mean, I didn't watch any of the Swedish league, so I'm not professing to know anything about really what he did at Elfsborg, but he's really kind of concentrated on playing out from the back and keeping the ball, which I've been pretty impressed with. So in terms of on the ball, I expect that. I mean, this is going to be the acid test. Does he? As much as I'm excited about it as a fan, as a kind of tactical enthusiast, I can't wait to see what we do on the first goal kick. Do we play short? Do we, and conversely, this the same on the other end. Do we press high against? How high do we press against Celtic? So we're obviously coming at this with, I think there's a lot of caveats here in terms of we haven't played a team like you before, and so that's my get out of jail card for a few of my answers. But based on what we've seen, I think he'll try and build out the back. The two centre backs, struggled a little bit against Hearts when they were pressed and where they were pushed. Nielsen, who's been really great, the Norwegian midfielder, he does, he keeps the ball ticking over. He's always an option, but I don't know for sure if he's the best receiving the ball back to pressure, kind of in a tight space. And so I think first of all, you'll see that, they'll try and build out. And then from there, if they do get it out, McGrath's kind of been playing as a kind of inside kind of number 10 almost. He'll dip inside and he gives like another passing option, and sometimes it's like a kind of box in there. The big question we're kind of discussing, I think, right now is who's in the midfield three, and whether Palaversa potentially comes into this game over maybe a Clarkson, and we could talk about how that might look in terms of the shape. But so first of all, they've looked to pass the ball. They've looked to get the ball in the other team's half and kind of try and create openings, lacking the final ball a little bit. They've really we're starting to see the transitional elements come in there. And sometimes that's, after a longer Aberdeen passing sequence, we maybe kept the ball a little bit in their half, and then we lose it, and then we win it back. The first goal against Hearts is a good example of that recently. The one goal everyone's kind of pinpointing as this kind of counter-pressing kind of highlight was Keskinen's goal against Dundee, where we kind of won it in midfield and quickly got it in behind, and we did that. And I expect those things will be important on Saturday. And then off the ball, it's kind of been like a mid-block, I would say. Like the line of confrontation is usually around about the kind of halfway line. They'll squeeze, if they get the right triggers. It's a 4-4-2 shape, kind of what I think most teams seem to be kind of employing now off the ball. what concerns me a little bit, and you might tell me if this is misguided or not, is that they have allowed that wide pass, potentially from a centre back to, I mean, Hearts started it, they've inverted their full backs, and obviously I'm thinking Vaya will probably play left back, right, and then that maybe a Scales to a Maeda and a combination from there. So they're giving up that space in the wide areas, and then last thing I think we've seen a willingness to try and defend the box. In the later stages of games against Motherwell, even St Johnstone and Dundee, they've been willing to defend the box, and I do think that's maybe part of the resilience that he's trying to build in the team. That he's trying to kind of, make sure that they can defend, periods of pressure, and then obviously if that counter-attacking patterns kind of, improve, then maybe we can start to pick teams off a little bit as they commit more numbers forward. But we'll see on Saturday how a lot of that plays out.
I think, sorry, Alan, I was just going to say there to Gavin, the games that you mentioned, like, I think especially Motherwell, but the others as well, when Aberdeen lost a goal or came under pressure, near the end of the game, it was one of those, as one of your old bosses would have said, Alex Ferguson, that squeaky bum time sort of thing. But they did show resilience, and they did grind out the result and get the points on the board.
Yep, absolutely.
Alan,
I was just going to say, I wonder if, in terms of the degree to which they'll play out from the back, the degree to which they'll press, I wonder if he's watched some of Celtic's games this season, because other than Borussia Dortmund, which we don't want to mention really, easily, and I'm not being flippant here, easily the best team Celtic has played this season is Falkirk in the League Cup.
Yeah,
by a distance, and they actually played out from the back, and they pressed. Not all the time, very selectively and very intelligently. And it worked brilliantly for them for 45 minutes. They were the better team. They were 2-1 up. And they just simply ran out of energy. They just couldn't maintain the way they were playing against Celtic. We just blew them away. The subs came on, and we just blew them away in the last minute. But I'm sure Aberdeen have got A, a better bench, and B, probably better players and fitter players. So if there's a template there, perhaps for Tallinn, if you watch that game, if Aberdeen want to play that way, that you might get success.
Yeah, the one thing I would say there, Alan, is I have a friend who's a Falkirk fan, and I think they're probably ahead of us in terms of their patterns of play out at the back. In terms of their, it's been instilled in their kind of system for a while, albeit against significantly less pressure. But I agree. I definitely think. I mean, I watched that game. I watched the first half back before kind of before writing my preview, which I'm doing still right now. But yeah, absolutely. And I think I was maybe I'll get ahead of myself, but Keskinen would be the guy I think we would be hoping to play. I can't remember the lad's name, the right winger. You had the Falkirk guy, and potentially that role for us. And releasing the ball, but yeah, they were. I think so. It would be really nice to see if they were able to kind of pull it off.
You get the feeling that just as you're alluding to there, Gavin, that he is trying to imprint a particular style of play, and it wouldn't surprise me if he did start that way at Celtic Park. But the other thing that I've noticed watching Aberdeen this season, I've been pretty impressed by, is his in-game management, his use of substitutes, especially to try and change the game and make an impact.
Yeah, actually on both sides, in terms of starting the games, there's been a few games where we've actually started and really kind of, St Johnstone was one, even Kilmarnock, where we've really kind of almost been a step ahead of the opposition, Motherwell too, and they've had to adapt themselves, and then that kind of changes the game, the other way. But you're absolutely right in terms of subs. I mean, one of the big things I didn't mention earlier, but he's really done a good job of, I think, whether he's making players better or he's making them understand their role better, or he's doing both. And Shaden Morris is a great example. Whenever we signed him, everyone was saying this lad's, he's really quick, just get him to kind of stay wide, beat his man, get the ball in the box. But he could never do it. But Tallinn has him doing it. Gave him a lot of minutes in the League Cup stages, and now he's coming off the bench, and he set up Nisbet's winner against Ross County, and one of the goals against Kilmarnock, I think he was a big part of that too. So yeah, and then obviously now we have Duke, who's back, and he obviously had a big impact against Hearts. So if we can keep it tight, I think we do have players to come off the bench and maybe offer something different.
I was going to ask about, the impact. You were talking about players that have really developed and the difference from last season. And please do forgive my pronunciation. Is it Gaye up front, who has been absolutely flying, but got an injury in training? It looks as if he's going to be out until the new year. Is it going to be Duke, kind of Nisbet coming in, different types of players in a lot of ways? Or do you think maybe Keskinen will kind of play a wee bit more differently now with his pace?
Yeah, I mean, he Guy's still, I think, a bit of a mystery to all of us. But actually, the last game I think it was the last game he played was Motherwell, or maybe he played Spartans and then he got injured. But he was playing like as a number 10, which no one really kind of thought that was his position. And it was like he's filling a gap until Clarkson comes back. But what he actually did was kind of give us a bit more athleticism. There was a lot of fluidity in that front three between him and McGrath maybe dipping inside, or he was able to carry the ball, and he's a threat in the air. So he's a real big miss. And I think even up until maybe that Motherwell game, I think a lot of Aberdeen fans, myself probably included, were thinking, what's going on here? Is he just kind of hit the form in a couple of moments? But he really showed like a ability to carry the ball, beat a man, and that goal was really a superb goal.
Something else, yeah.
Yeah, as was his goal against Kilmarnock, the header, the one where it's kind of behind him and he pops it in. So he's been a miss. I think everyone was like, all right, now Clarkson's back, we've got our team, but I'll be intrigued to see how he comes back in January. I think if you look at the data, I mean, is he still the top scorer in the league? So I think he clearly had a lot of issues with his confidence and coming over. Yeah. There's stories of him in casinos at Aberdeen because he was lonely. But I think that's a testament to Thiele's man management that he was able to kind of find a role for him and give the lad the confidence to display his talents.
Speaking of casinos and loneliness, James, you're sitting there resplendent in your beautiful red shirt. If you'd like to come in at this point in this, as Gavin, any issues with Aberdeen?
This has been coordinated and intentional because not only that I'm wearing red, first of all, I'd like to welcome our guests. So the fact, again, Gavin, thank you for coming on. Want to be hospitable to our guests. And also, I like to wind people up. That's one of my major hobbies. When I was growing up, I thought it was like a genetic thing and being raised by a woman from Clydebank. And then I went to Scotland as an adult the first time, and I realized, no, I'm just an asshole. So it wasn't this inbreed thing or bred thing. So we have some viewers who give me a lot of hassle when I wear blue. My daughter goes to a university that has blue colors, so my pullovers and my shirts have blue in it. And my son goes to a high school whose primary color is red. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So my question, my first question, because you guys have covered, knocked off a bunch of the ones that I had on my list. So it's interesting. This is not only a matchup of the two top of the regular table teams. These are also the top two teams as far as completely disconnected from underlying statistics, like XG.
Right.
Both teams are hugely outperforming their XG. And when I looked at Aberdeen, you talked about it with Guillet. I mean, the finishing has just been insane. Like just great, like a lot, it's the best as a supporter. You see these incredible top shelf finishes and just inside the bars. I mean, it's wonderful. From a statistical perspective, but also kind of maybe things that people like me who don't watch every minute of every game, outside of just finishing, what would you suggest is a characteristic of what's going on that could help explain some of this overperformance relative to what we would say XG differential in the nerd universe?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've picked up on this and I've noticed it. And obviously the first conversation actually I had with you, Alan, was about the high shot conversion. So, I mean, even last week, Devlin scores a goal that, or not last week, 2 weeks ago against Hearts, where, it was a kind of strange goal, but an amazing finish, but probably one that he doesn't make again. Well, we've noticed that they really like the cutback which I think seems to be the prevalent, the best method to score, and that's where Morris, as I mentioned before, they've gone. They try and get that player at the line, and then they really make a focus on cutting it back. Mackenzie in particular has been working on that. I don't know if he has any assists, but you see that a lot where he kind of gets close to it. Nisbet, I don't know if you're going to tell me that finishing ability is overrated, but I mean, his goal against Dundee, that was like a first time finish from the edge of the box. I mean, he's if you put players with that skill set in the right place, I think hopefully that they're going to deliver from it. But in terms of the strategy, and the one philosophical thing we've heard from Thielin actually has been his goal is to create overloads in the box. That's kind of the one thing he said, he wants to be really good at is creating overloads in the box. And you'll see a lot of our, Devlin's a good example. He'll maybe lay it off out wide. He'll kind of invert, he'll play it wide, and then he gets himself in the box. And there's always a lot of runners in the box. So I think, the strategy seems to be to kind of, get the ball wide and create cutbacks. And that would be the biggest thing I see. But it's not necessarily relating to creating goal scoring chances. It's, but I think hopefully we're creating good ones. I mean, I don't know how you can explain a run like that. Maybe you can't in terms of finishing. Maybe it's just he's doing such a good job of making the guys feel confident and, taking opportunities that they're feeling confident, in those places.
Yeah, I've found usually the answer is all of the above. It's the hard part is figuring
Right.
out what the details and apportioning that credit is.
Yeah.
So my next question has to do with, so when I hear how you guys are playing and where your relative strengths and weaknesses are, and what I've looked at with Aberdeen, I'm scared on a relative basis with one big exclusion, which makes me excited. Which is
Okay.
I'm hoping you try to play out from the back.
Yeah.
And that some of that has to do with who I thought was a really good piece of recruitment was Mitov in goal, where the data suggests, I say the data, like what data we have available at a quality level suggests that he's a pretty good shot stopper, one of the best in the league. But also from what I've seen, maybe not the best from coming off his line, maybe not the best decision-making, and maybe not the best with his feet and distribution. So is that fit your test and what you've looked at and watching him every game, that's kind of his broad profile, which is he's such a good stopper, any of these other weaknesses, you just live with
it? For the most part, yes. I think the one thing we've noticed from him compared to the previous incumbent is that Mitov comes out and claims crosses. I don't know if that's just a kind of overconscious thing that because Roos never did that, but
he was a potted plant. Yep.
Yeah. But Mitov definitely has done that, and he eased pressure at times. There's been a couple where he's had a couple of shaky moments, but for the most part, he's pretty good at that. And you're right on his distribution, particularly, playing short. Or having to play into pressure, or some of his longer passes have gone out of bounds or whatever. I have noticed, I think in the Hearts game, that he's starting to hit a couple of those mid-range passes, like where you break the first line and maybe they found McGrath, I think, or I don't know if you saw the Jack McKenzie back heel kind of flick that was another one where kind of Mitov hit that range. So I think they're maybe working with him on those kind of range of passing. Hopefully if you're asking a goalie to control the ball and pass the ball, and if the patterns are rehearsed enough, that he'll get better at that. But I would agree that that's definitely probably his area of weakness is his distribution.
Well, and I'll just echo, I mean, to me, part of what makes this game so fascinating is because Thielin does have a pedigree of being a tactical, being flexible tactically. And I think, that's one of my hang-ups from an analytics perspective with Celtic, but also kind of broadly in football is it's lagging other sports in this idea of optimization from a game-to-game perspective. There's like this dumbing down culture of footballers that they can't learn in dynamically on an ongoing basis and adjust quickly and that kind of thing. So I'm just fascinated to see what game plan Thielen comes up with, because one of the things that I've been heartened by, but also constantly paranoid with this season, is that I think there are some obvious issues that Celtic have in certain phases of play. And we saw part of it against Dortmund, and we saw a mix of it a different way against Falkirk. So I'm just fascinated to see what Thielen comes up with and how Rodgers kind of, rebuts it. Because that's something we've been waiting for Rodgers to do a little bit more proactively as well. So I'll let you guys get back to the next round of questions then.
Yeah, no, I mean, really building on that, James. I was really interested, being an old risk manager and being Scottish. I focus on negatives. so in that spirit, then, in terms of, and James mentioned weaknesses, is what weaknesses do you see in the Celtic team that you think Aberdeen are well placed to exploit? And similarly, what weaknesses do you see in Aberdeen's team that you're kind of worried about Celtic attacking?
Well, I mean, I don't want to. It's a dangerous question. You ever start listing?
You don't want to give us any clues to Warner's prior to
well,
that.
yeah. I mean, I think the probably the way I see if Aberdeen are to be successful here would be kind of exploiting the space behind your fullbacks potentially if they go forward. And we mentioned Keskin, and I think the big question is we don't know. I don't know if he's quite like Premier League speed. I think he's fast. I think he was very fast in Finland. I think he's still pretty fast in Scotland. I don't know if he's. I don't know how athletic Valle is, but we know Maeda will recover back. So I think that's probably an area whereby if we can allow you guys to kind of get in your kind of structure and commit numbers forward and maybe pick off a pass in midfield and move quickly. Obviously the Dortmund game, we saw kind of how you had some challenges in transition. We don't have Adeyemi, but maybe
Stop saying that
name. But maybe we can, and given Thielen's background in this, there's one of the famous games that when he announced to be manager was. Like after a couple of weeks, Elfsborg played Malmo, and it was a top of the table clash then as well. And Elfsborg won 3-0, I think, with like 18% possession and all counter attacks. So he does have kind of form for this. So that would be, I think, one. I mean, I don't know if Trusty playing on the right, does that give us maybe an avenue if he's a left footer, right? And maybe we can force the play down there and pick it off. But that would probably be, the limit of it, I think, in terms of, real weaknesses. You guys feel free to let me know if I've missed any. In terms of us, I think my big concern is probably twofold. I think Rubezic and Molloy have done well, but they have not, we keep using this phrase, but they've not been tested anything like this level here. And I'm assuming Kyogo will play. If you guys think differently, then yeah. I mean, I'm expecting this will be your first, your full strength team potentially here. And just his movement and his kind of awareness, and obviously, Rubezic has softened out a lot of his rough edges this season, but he just a step too slow. He's not the fastest, and potentially either on transition or just kind of a loose ball in the box or whatever like that. That kind of concerns me. Malloy, he's come in from the League of Ireland, not on scales. And they're not too dissimilar, like ginger, tall, left footers. But
League of Ireland's full of them.
Exactly, yeah.
And glad I didn't say that.
No comments, please.
Yeah, and so he's done really, I think, better than expected. But he has had a couple of kind of lapses in concentration. The goal against St Mirren, the penalty against Dundee. Last week he kind of got caught for, or 2 weeks ago, for a chance for Shanklin. So whether he and Rubezic are ready for this test, that's going to be a big question mark. And then I think the last thing is, I mentioned it to you before about the ball going wide. I was looking back at the semi-final. Johnson makes a run from an inverted right back position for the O'Reilly equaliser. That's what I'm worried about a little bit. Like a midfield runner kind of getting in between the centre back and behind the full back, and then just getting a better crossing position for a cut back. That's probably where I'm most concerned.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. I had two quite specific questions. I know so it'll be very quick. They'll be quick answers. But one is Keskinen, big money for Aberdeen. His underlying numbers don't look amazing, but he's young and he's learning. So I just wanted to get your initial thoughts on him. And the second of all is a very specific question: is why is it that Aberdeen have faced more long balls from the opposition than any other team in the league? So two questions. Keskinen,
Okay, all right.
team faced so many long balls.
Yeah. Well, the first one, I think. So he's definitely better if he's got space to run into. He's struggled against, even like Spartans, even, some of those games where he gets the ball, he can kind of dribble down at the blind alleys, and he doesn't really have the footwork, to get past players. But he is good at kind of getting the ball out of his feet, getting down the line, getting his head up. And then, I think they've obviously already started to work on him in terms of, cutting the ball back. So I think he's a project, but there's a reason he's at Aberdeen. And I think they've probably got a couple of years in mind where they can hopefully develop him, and he can be one of the next ones that they sell off. And I think he fits Healing's style, to be fair. In terms of the long ball as well, I mean, we've played Motherwell, Kilmarnock, St Mirren, and then Dundee launched a lot as well against us. So, and Craig Levine, St Johnstone, I know they were possessing the ball a little bit more, but still. So I don't know if it's a product of the opposition we're playing.
Yeah, fair enough.
But there is.
It was an outlier. That gets my interest when I see an outlier.
Yeah, I do think some of these numbers might be affected by, you guys talk about game state a lot, about how he's maybe made a decision to just try and get the win at times, to maybe kind of defend the lead a little bit longer than he might, potentially to build up that resiliency. I'm not totally sure, but we'll see.
I think just as you're saying there, Gavin, from what I've seen in those games I mentioned earlier, as teams were trying to get back into the game, like your Motherwells, they really were launching it in. So that may have impacted on some of the data in those games in the latter stages, where Aberdeen very much kind of tried to hold on to what they had and defend the box, which they did successfully, I have to say. Gavin, just before we move on, did you have any further questions for any of us, regarding Celtic?
What would you say? I guess the question I have is the midfield three. Who do you think it'll be? Bernardo or Engels?
I'll let James answer this.
My guess, and it is a guess at this point because I think there's a reasonable case to be made for any of the mix, even McCowan. I think you could make a case. I'm doubting that, but I think you could make a reasonable case over it. So I suspect it'll be back to Hatate and Engels with McGregor. I think that's the most likely. And quite frankly, that I'd prefer that. To me, that's the three that would most likely. Be our best setup. But again, that still creates some of these issues that Alan and I rail. There's nothing you came up with that is more horrifying than the stuff that we talk about every week, as far as things that could jeopardize Celtic and hurt Celtic. So I think that's the most likely three.
Yeah, and I think the big question potentially for us is if we do play Shinnie in there with Palaversa and Nielsen, there's a lot of talk, he'll just pin Shinnie on McGregor. But then what do you do if Valle comes into that space? Then you're in a lot, it becomes a lot harder. So that's where I'd be surprised if they change their 4-4-2 pressing shape. But listen, that's what we're all looking forward to. So I'm excited.
Absolutely, it'll probably change after 60 minutes anyway when we bring the subs on, and make use of the use of the substitution rules.
Yep.
Gavin, if I could just say again, thanks so much for coming on. It can't be easy coming on to a show which is devoted to another club, and it's been really valuable. And I would encourage any of the viewers or listeners to visit your site. Really, really interesting. And
it's very good.
I won't wish you well for Saturday, but I hope you finish second this season in the league. I think we could all say amen to that. So
we can all get behind that.
Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys. And remember, this is game 1 of a 2-game series. So if we don't win on Saturday, we've got the League Cup semi in a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Gavin.
Cheers.
Yes.
So, James, some really interesting points there, I thought. In terms of the match on Saturday, what are you kind of most looking forward to seeing in the way Celtic perform?
Yeah, it was... First of all, thanks again to Gavin. He was excellent. Continues our string of tremendous guests from opposition teams that we're playing. And so he really did offer insight into the dynamic that I'm concerned about from a Celtic perspective, which is facing a manager who's smart, willing to change, and come up with a good game plan. And the fact that he does have a history of setting up sides that have lower resources than the opposition, Elfsborg versus Malmo, for example, being comfortable not having the ball and setting up a side to attack through counters. I mean, so whether that's the formula he comes up with relative to, examining Celtic, how we've played this year, how we're likely to set up, I think that's the big question going in. I think it was interesting to hear Gavin characterize how they're not doing that at all, really haven't been this season so far. So it'll be interesting if they can flip that switch on and off, particularly at the scale that they'll have to be effective at doing that against Celtic. So I think the vast majority of the fascinating aspect of this game is on the Aberdeen side, because we're the dominant 800-pound gorilla walking into this. Particularly at home, with the form that we've been in domestically and with, how we approached Dortmund, I doubt that we're going to now pivot and shift how we're approaching games tactically. So the question, and as Gavin's question was about the midfield selection. There's some of that. Fitness is still a question. I know there's talk that CCV will be back, that Taylor may not be ready yet. So we'll have to see. Alistair Johnson's been laboring under things, and guys are traveling all over the world, even if they're not playing necessarily. So I think our side's more so selection and fitness. And I think theirs is more so on the side of how they're going to move the pieces on the chessboard, which all in, because we're going to have to respond. I think there's a material aspect to how we play relative to what they end up doing and how we counter it, not in a counterattack sense, but from a tactics perspective. So, as you opened the podcast, Martin, it's a great spectacle to have this game with these two teams at this point in the season. I mean, it really is just an exciting prospect to look forward to.
Absolutely, a light in the north.
Enough to celebrate by wearing a red shirt.
Listen, if that result doesn't go our way, I know where the blame's attached. There'll be a lot of comments. One of the things to pick up on what you were saying there as well, James, interesting, bringing in Thielen, not one of the old familiar faces that goes on the managerial merry-go-round in Scotland, and he's come in with some fresh ideas, but possibly a lack of fear as well. Sometimes when you're getting managers who have been brought through the Scottish game, going to Ibrox, going to Celtic Park, they automatically think they're beaten before they arrive there. This is a guy who's come in with a great record in Sweden. He's got an unbelievable record since he's been at Aberdeen, and it will be really interesting to see how he approaches this match. But I think they're coming here with a bit of confidence, hopefully, and it's the last time any of us hope will mention this, but like we did against BVB, you know, in Dortmund, and they fall into the same traps as we did on that occasion. Alan, what's your thoughts on the match?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I think, what Gavin's done, I think, in how he described Thurleen's approach and the way that they've approached the games thus far is he's kind of helped me make sense of some of the data I was going to share with you, really, because it's very interesting. They're definitely by miles the most interesting team in the league at this minute, and the data is fascinating in terms of the performance takes. Obviously, I've only seen a couple of their games; I've not watched them all the time. But as I recant some of this sort of data. What I'm mindful of is Gavin talking about the flexibility that Thurleen has showed in terms of a tactical approach, and also the management of games. Like the Hearts game, they won 3-2. I think they scored 3 goals off of like 0.8 xg. I think Hearts had nearly 3 xg. Some of that is as Gavin said, it's game state. It's actually allowing yourself to be attacked. Making a choice to defend your lead. Right, yep. And that teams don't often do that these days, and it does impact the underlying stats, and it probably explains some of what I'm about to say. So, just on simple XG, StatsBomb has got their XG differential of 1.2 to 1.07. That's not a massive. That's way closer than what their actual goals for and goals against is. Opta actually has them absolutely bang on level. The same XG for, the same XG against. Right, all that sort of suggests, luck really playing a part. But I actually think it's not just that. There might be a bit of that, and we'll come to goalkeeping performance especially. I think there's a little bit of game state, game management here, where Aberdeen have been leading in games and been happy to defend those leads and not necessarily feel under pressure to chase for more goals as Celtic often do, because they've actually, what surprised me is that the defence sits really deep, even by SPFL standards. Whereas Celtic are nearly on the halfway line, Aberdeen are about 41 metres. That's one of the deepest sitting defences in the league, and because of that, they're actually very strong at resisting clear shots against. They're very strong at resisting shots on transition, which is a Celtic strength, and they've actually got the lowest shot on ball value against them of minus 0.13. It's a bit of an abstract number, that, but essentially it's a StatsBomb construct. Essentially what it's saying is the opposition are not getting great shots against Aberdeen. And on all those things kind of stack up. They're by the data, the most direct team, they attack with great pace, they're a counter-attacking team, even against the standard of opposition that they've said. And then you come to some of the smarts. So they take 72% of the shots from inside the box. Now, Celtic only take 63, right? So this is really smart. The highest is actually Motherwell, but that's a bit of an anomaly because Motherwell's chances generally come from set plays. So the fact that the Motherwell's chances will be inside the box is rather offset by a lot of them will be headers or shots under a lot of pressure with a lot of bodies in the way. So they won't be high XG chances in general. But Aberdeen look like they're the smartest team in the league in terms of taking shots inside the box. And then we come to the goalkeepers. Now, the goalkeeping on-ball value against, this is StatsBomb's on-ball value for goalkeepers of the opposition to Aberdeen is minus 0.43. It's like the worst of the league by a mile. So goalkeepers have basically had a nightmare against Aberdeen, and that's just really comes down to dumb luck. But also, if you're going to take shots from centre of the goal, from cutbacks, you're going to put goalkeepers under pressure in terms of their ability to save shots. Whilst their own goalkeeper is actually third in the league, behind, funnily enough, Butland and Schmeichel, who both, according to StatsBomb's models, are having really good seasons. Their pressing stats are actually very low. But again, that doesn't mean to say they're not going to press us. Again, what we learned from Gavin is that they'll selectively press. And again, this is what good teams do. You don't necessarily have to accumulate huge volumes of pressures, which will just serve to tire your players out quickly. What is far more a sign of a well-managed team is to actually selectively press. And they actually have the highest volume of regains from pressures in the league.
I was actually going to mention that was something that really stood out for me. Yeah.
So that again suggests a smart, well-drilled team. But again, go through all these things. Are we expecting Celtic to get beat, etc.? If you look at the attacking metrics, basic attacking metrics like just sheer volume metrics, like number of shots, shots on target, number of goalkeeper saves that you force with your shots, XG and what have you, pretty much standard across all of those metrics. Celtic generate 2 times that which Aberdeen do, right? So, for all that we've just said, this is an uphill task for them, right? This is easily the hardest game they'll have had this season. Virtually all their League Cup games have been against lower league opposition. They've played Hearts, St Mirren, and Kilmarnock, who were top 6 last season. All have struggled to balance the start of the season with European matches. They've played all 3 of them at home. And the games they've played away from home have been against bottom 6 sides. They haven't been to any. They haven't been to any of the Edinburgh grounds. They haven't been to any of the Glasgow grounds. They haven't really played. I would say the better teams in the league yet. So you got to accept all of these things can be true. There's evidence here of a very well coached team, a team that's had no European distractions, has been able to focus on league matches, has been able to navigate through cup ties against lower league opposition, whose goalkeeper is having an inspired season, where the opposition goalkeepers are having an absolute nightmare, but have definite signs of being a really well coached side in terms of not giving up chances on transition, which tend to be high value, of creating chances themselves from good cutback situations, lots of shots in the box, which gives you the best chance, and of being very clever about their pressing. So that to me is an absolutely fascinating mix of data, and it's not the case, which I think maybe we were hinting at last week, of they've just been lucky so far. It's not that. There's a lot more going on here, and there's a lot of positive stuff if you're an Aberdeen fan in terms of the way that the team's playing.
And there's also that element of momentum, which they've gained both in confidence for their playing staff, but the support, Pittodrie's been absolutely bouncing, and they've been carrying a large away support as well, thousands, travelling in their thousands to games, which I think helps the players in many of these away grounds. With that in mind, James, looking at this a little bit more long term, is the competition from Aberdeen in terms of the championship, or even them been second and splitting these huge Glasgow clubs, realistic in your opinion?
Probably not. With the caveat being that weird stuff happens. And I wrote something this week on the Substack. It was only peripherally talking about Aberdeen. It was actually more so not losing focus on Rangers as the primary threat for the league, and what could go right for Rangers that would, kind of get them back into a performance situation where, we start worrying about variance being a problem, because they're not right now. Like, the distance between us and Rangers right now on the underlying data would suggest that we're going to walk this league. And if everything stays stable as it has been, then that is the most likely outcome. When I say walk the league, 15, 20 points, something like that. So, part of this analysis, I looked at the Leicester season in 15-16 when they won the English Premier League, and what were the variables that went into that. And inevitably, one of them is that the big clubs have an off season for whatever reason, whether that's negative variance or bad recruitment or some mix of those. Each team has their own situation, but they won the league with 81 points, which, and they overperformed things like their XG differential by, 20 some goals or something, and expected points by 16 points. And so it was this formula of them really, really having objectively for Leicester City, a great season, then having positive luck thrown in, and other teams being kind of not great. Right. So that would need to be the mix for an Aberdeen, most likely, for them in order to legitimately threaten for the championship, obviously the league title. But I would argue at this point also for second, because the gulf here is just, it's so large in a resource basis in order for them to compete. And they're so early in this revolution that they're under with Thielen, if we want to call it that. And I think they have been getting their house in order a little bit on the analytics side the last couple of seasons. I think there's been some evidence of that. And they've had some very smart people go through the club and then move on to other jobs. So I think, these things like picking up inefficiencies and I know it's a radical idea, but aligning your recruitment with how you're going to play to pick that up, like he said with Teskinen, even their own support hasn't kind of figured out maybe how Thielens looks like he's going to be using this guy. It's part of his master plan. So having that alignment of strategy, I think they're moving in the right direction. It's more likely than not it's too early, even if in a theoretical world that they were gonna be able to get to that point.
James, if I could pick up a little bit there before coming to Alan, so that you can expand on this a little bit. That's kind of also alluding to the changes across the city, which you have mentioned previously. When you were talking about Thielen there, you were talking about being smart, willing to change. How would you say Clement fits that model, rather, in terms of what he's trying to do across the city?
Yeah, directionally also, that was part of the focus of what I'd written, was more so on what is the evidence that Rangers are changing how they play on the margin. Again, it's given the competitive dynamics domestically, these things are typically on the margin. We talked about last season, Brendan Rodgers a little different than Ange Ball on the margin in certain ways, but generally speaking in the same neighborhood. And I'd say that's what Clement is doing, is becoming less focused on high crosses and high passes, those big switch balls that Goldson would always play to the left wing from the right center back position, the shelling game, the almost over reliance on Tavernier to be the creative source through crossing. And they're trying to be more narrow, more central, and progress on the ground. And the other aspect is that they're playing out of the back more vigilantly. And they're having problems with that. They're absolutely having problems with that. And I think there's a legitimate question as to how aligned their recruitment has been on that front. I'm not terribly critical on that yet. The jury's still out there. But they have a lot of moving parts here. They've, between injuries, late window recruitment, they're playing Bajrami out of position at left wing. Cherney's getting settled. It's starting to look like he's coming on to a game now. So, I think they'll get better. So I don't think it's going to be a static race. A big marker for that is that their average chance creation is better than it's been. And it's at a level that when we're firing it from open play in particular is, kind of the 0.12 average XG per shot from open play is like a fully firing level. And now some of that's hit with that Ross County laugher, but Celtic and Rangers always have those kind of laughers in their sample sizes when you go through seasons. So I see a pathway. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying I see a plan that's getting implemented. I think there's some coherence to it. Whether or not their defense is good enough and their recruitment's been good enough to bridge the gap that they have with us is the biggest uncertainty, I think. But I also think it's, living in the land of the paranoid. It's better, as Alan said last week, you plan for the best version of your opponent. And just thinking about the league campaign this season, if they're going to get to that point. And I expect, Aberdeen's going to get better. That's the other, their XG differential and the game state's a part of it. This guy's still putting in, as Gavin said, the patterns of play aren't there yet. And to your point, Martin, with this good feeling and, people call it momentum, people have buy-in. When you get buy-in from human beings, they're more likely to listen and actually, follow through with the game plan, even if it's a little awkward for players and it's not the thing that they're that familiar with. They're more likely to stick to it. And so I suspect Rangers and Aberdeen will get better as the season goes on from an underlying performance perspective. And then we throw in all these variables, all the luck in the the controllable and
You've also
uncontrollable
got squad
variance.
size as well, of course, when you inevitably have injuries. Okay, Aberdeen's not get the European matches and so forth, but yeah, I mean, there's a clear advantage there in terms of squad size over at Rangers.
100%.
Yeah, Alan, what's your views on it? Do you agree with James's point of view on both clubs?
So in Aberdeen first, I think the fascinating thing will be what we'll see on Saturday from Tellane is he an optimist or is he a pessimist? Right. If he's an optimist and he thinks that what's worked for them in the game so far and the frailties he might have seen in the Falkirk and Dortmund games, and he feels like going for it, then like Rodgers in Dortmund, he could walk away with a really bad outcome from that. If he's a pessimist, which I suspect, because he seems pretty pragmatic, I don't know if this is the way I think it will go, I suspect he will play more of a counter-attacking game and more of a careful game. And I think it will be quite a tricky afternoon for Celtic in that regard. In terms of their own chances, like I say, I'm more warming to the idea that this is a serious manager with a seriously well-organised side, with reasonably talented players, who also, at the moment, other than Gay injury, which was a real blow, are being able to field more or less the same 11 every single week, and they don't have European matches now. So they're going to, if they continue in that vein, that positive momentum of having a settled team, having confidence, having a fan base that will not go nuts if they lose a couple of games, right? I think they'll stick with them. Okay, that all helps. That all adds percentage points to your performance, to your unity, to your cohesion as a club and as a team, and I think that will help them. On the other side of the city, I understand that James is absolutely right to present the risks as he sees them, as we see them, and to present the best possible version of the Rangers that we may see this season. He is miles more optimistic on this than any of the Rangers podcasts, I have to say, but rightly so, because we try to be objective here. My own view on them is they are one draw away from an absolute meltdown. It's the complete opposite to Aberdeen. One bad result, one draw, one defeat, and Clermont is under huge pressure again. And that negativity just starts to build. I think they will struggle to balance a very tough set of Europa League fixtures with league fixtures. I don't believe they've got the quality in the squad to be able to play the same 11 Thursday, Sunday. I don't believe it's robust enough. And also the players that James has called out there, Bahrami, Cerny, and Dessers, the forward line essentially, are kind of streaky players. They're not the sort of players that are going to play Thursday, Sunday, and be 8 out of 10. They're not. They're never. Nothing in their careers suggests that they can deliver that level of consistency. So they're going to expect the likes of McCausland, Lawrence, and so forth, Igamani maybe, to kind of turn a 0-0 stodgy home game against Hibs into a 1-0 win and all that sort of thing. They've skated on thin ice in the league so far, actually, in terms of they've just got over narrow XG differential. Things have gone their way in those games. That won't continue. And as I say, it's just all set up for negativity. And so as far as their recruitment is going, remember that they are a club that has just implemented a severe austerity program. The question that nobody in Scottish football will ask, nobody in the media will ask, is why is that the case? And it's because they don't want to know the answer. And the answer is that to achieve this 55, they had to overspend to a ridiculous degree and therefore put the club under jeopardy again. And they're having to correct back to a wage bill that is more in line with the size of the club that they actually are, which, sadly for them, is a club significantly smaller in terms of resources than Celtic. So when you're in an austerity situation and you're recruiting accordingly, you tend to buy players that have a high degree of risk associated with them. That means risk in terms of attitude, injury profile, ability. And a lot of their signings, fall into a lot of those camps. In fact, the one last season that fell into the injury risk camp that they got away with spectacularly well for half a season was Butland. Butland's actually not had the injuries there that that he has had in his career, but what part of the reason that he's very weak diving down low to his left-hand side is because of that injury risk, and clubs have started to pick up on that. But point. players like Bahrami, what can I say? I have to be careful what I say here.
You're among friends.
Listen, football's a venal game, and some of the people involved in football are not the best. I think that's self-evident to be true. And when you're purchasing footballers from certain parts of the world, their representatives may not be the sort of person you'd want to take home to your grandmother. And listen, and there's issues there in terms of attitude, in terms of consistency. Sherney, listen, we've seen the public data on Sherney is that this is a very fragile individual. Right, he's already had altercations on the pitch with the fans. He's already had a very emotional press conference. No harm to the guy. He's clearly an emotional guy, and I have no issue with that at a human level. But James mentioned last week about what an absolute, absolutely horrendous it can be to be a professional footballer in the Glasgow Goldfish Bowl in terms of your privacy, the pressure on you, and so forth. It's not a forgiving place for fragile temperament. So I just feel, and James mentioned the defence, but I think the biggest issue is midfield. That midfield is wide open, absolutely wide open. There are huge gaps in transition playing against that team, which good sides with pace will exploit. So I'm completely 100% in agreement that James keeps us honest in terms of the risks, in terms of what could happen if they play to the best of their ability and continue to do so Thursday, Sunday, and that all of their tight SPFL games end up going their way. That can happen. It can happen. Absolutely can happen. But I suppose I feel there's an awful lot of risk layered upon risk throughout their squad, and all within the context of a support on the verge of being revolting, if I can put it that way.
So you can absolutely put it that way.
So I'm actually shifting my opinion a little bit towards that if Aberdeen can just be lucky with injuries, can evolve Tellin's game plans and continue on the path they have been, where they seem to be implementing well and getting the breaks, and the keeper continues to play brilliantly. I think they've got an outside chance still of finishing second. They really do.
Yeah, and I think, to add to that as well, it's great to see a genuine challenge where if the Rangers are going up to Pittodrie, they're in for a game, and ditto with the Hearts getting a new manager who may or may not improve. One would think surely it must be an improvement. So the stronger the Scottish League, well, let's hope. But the stronger the Scottish League is, the better for us, really, because all too often a very weak side from Ibrox is able to get the points, grind out these results just because of how weak the other teams are. So, just one thing to mention there as well, Alan. You posed the question about Tillin's optimism or pessimism, and I was immediately thinking of Bergman and the Bergman movies, and I thought, he's going to be a pessimist, isn't he? Surely.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, this is even getting better. We've got to have a film review section by the way.
Yeah, boy.
Once we've exhausted every piece of poetry that's out there, we're on to film reviews.
We'll start with Bergman, and absolutely.
By the way, I just real quick to wrap up that prior segment. Alan and I are pretty much in agreement. I mean, nothing that he said do I disagree with. I think the interesting, again, going back to an analytical perspective, the interesting part, because the point of layering of risks is vital, and what that does is it shifts the risk distribution. The fascinating part is relative to whether that gets realized. You kick off that risk, it starts to cascade because of how many layers there are to it potentially, and then that's the Celtic 2020-21 season. Like that's what happened. Is it cascaded? And that's how we lose a league by 25 points in the most important, campaign of a generation. So that could absolutely happen to Rangers this season. I shouldn't say absolutely. I agree with Alan that the probabilities of that happening are elevated, but I would argue it's still a less likely than not scenario, if that makes sense, right? When you get into these things, it's like normally them finishing third, given the disparity in resources, would be like a 2% outcome. And let's say it's even a 20% outcome probability, or even a 40% outcome probability. That's 20 times the normal rate. Massive shift in the risk distribution, but still under 50%. Right.
Yeah,
so
that's fair. That's fair.
Right. So that's kind of how when I'm talking about it, that's how I see it, because the flip side of that is, to your point, Alan, you still need Aberdeen to have some of the luck going on here at the same time.
Yeah.
And then you're layering on a whole nother layer of probabilities that have to occur. But yeah, I everything out, like, I 100% agree with the risk dynamics there. Now, the last thing I will say is that part of and this is a personal issue, and my background in financial markets. There's a saying going back to Baron von Rothschild from, I forget which century, 17th or 18th century, I think, which is that the best, you buy at the sound of cannons and sell at the sound of trumpets. Okay, and so the day before we recorded heading into Dortmund, I had this horrible sense of, my God, are the trumpets blaring, right? I mean, the aggregate social mood of our support was, we're going to go into Dortmund and kick their ass, right? And I to Alan's point, listening to Ranger supporters right now, they're almost jumping off of buildings. That's where their sentiment is on their own club. And so that could be, I'm not saying it is, because, when these risks layer, you could have said that in after the second 4-goal loss to Prague in the autumn of 2020.
Sure.
We're like, how can this get worse? It's not possible. And then, oh my God, did it get worse? Like, way worse. So we might be there for Rangers this season, meaning that it's going to get a lot worse. But damn, it's bad right now. And the cannons are firing. It's just what's the degree that they're going to continue, and whether we're close to an inflection point. So that's how I'll summarize the dynamics from my perspective.
And worth bearing in mind, of course, that the Rangers captain had specifically mentioned how tough it was playing in front of a toxic crowd at that stadium. Yeah. And their kind of most successful league season was when it was an empty stadium. So hopefully there is something in that when the crowd inevitably turns. The Roman mob kind of brought to mind a little bit there, maybe. If we could move on a little bit just now, I was thinking ahead to Europe, but before that, thinking about some of the individuals in our defence. I'm a huge fan of the League of Ireland and recruitment there. But in all honesty,
and Gingers really... apparently, from what you said earlier. My goodness,
you with your racial profiling, yeah.
Listen, with my family background, there's lots to choose from there. I think that we're well represented. But in all honesty, I've been so impressed with Scales, especially this season. I think he's been really growing over the last few seasons. And we're now in a position, we were talking earlier about Carter Vickers and injuries and so forth. And going into these matches, these big European matches, Scales is now the elder statesman. He is the experienced player. He's the international player. And a lot seems to rest on his shoulders. Alan, if I could come to you really and kind of give me your breakdown and information about Scales' performances, that would be really valuable.
Yeah, so I had a good dig around, because obviously, I think I mentioned earlier in the season, there's a group of players, Scales, Taylor, Maeda, who are all moving into that 26, 27-year-old sort of peak year period, and they all seem to have started the season very strongly, and I don't think that's a coincidence. They're all players that have been here a little while. They're clearly trusted and regular choices in their roles, and all of these things come together, and all these things matter. And I think with Scales, I just wanted to really double check the data again, because in all honesty, when I looked at his data sort of halfway through last season, he really was trending in terms of my model that I've got for centre halves. He really was trending in the sort of lower left segment, which is not where you want to be, and hence why the comments we're making about can we do better. But in terms of really focusing on league form, because if you add European and Cup games, the variability of opposition kind of throws things a little bit out of kilter. So, sticking to league form and looking at his trends really over since he's became a regular. When I look at, for example, defensive action, so I've got a very, very highly aggregated metric, defensive action success rate, bit of a mouthful, but it really does look at all of the defensive action of a player, and really does sort of say to what extent are they successful in those actions? Do they win their duels and so forth? When they intercept the ball, do they win the ball, etc.? All of those things, and actually the gap between centre backs that are, let's call it the sort of the Jack Hendry, F.A. Ambrose end of the spectrum versus the Carter Vickers, Van Dijk end of the spectrum, you're talking about 5 or 6%, right? It's a really short, small, variance in a big data item that contains lots of metrics, and really, long story short, is that this season kind of Scales has shifted himself really towards the upper regions of that, just in terms of his defending capabilities. And that's really encouraging because, as I say, when you look at things like duels, won, interceptions, and so forth, this is the bread and butter of defending. And in my opinion on this framework and this model is that it matches the eye test pretty well in terms of what you'd consider to be successful centre backs that Celtic have had over the last 8 to 10 years. Digging into that a little bit, last season he was winning 77% of his duels. This season it's 81%. So again, that sounds like a small difference, but it's massive in terms of the impact that has over a season. And that suggests, perhaps better timing, better decision making around when to engage, when not to engage, how aggressively to engage. All of those things can be inferred from that, and that's really what's been driving a lot of that improvement. But then, if we go to the other side of the game, which is probably less, I suppose, visible, but much commented upon as regards Scales, which is, is ball progression. Because again, Celtic centre-back, it's not unusual for Celtic centre-back to be completing 100 passes in a game, right? It's a significant amount of time. The two players who will be on the ball the most in any game will be the two centre-backs, right? They'll have more of the ball than anyone else on the field. So this is really important, and especially important to the way that Celtic play, building out from the back, looking to get the likes of McGregor on the ball as quickly as possible, looking to get the wingers engaged one-on-one very quickly. The centre-backs are usually often the fulcrum for that. And what has been even more noticeable is that Scales is now. When I started recording packing, so I've got about 7 years worth of data now, and at that time, going back to the 17-18 season, nobody averaged over a pack passing score of more than 40. No one got to 40 until Stephen Welsh in the 2021 season. Right, it was all the likes of Ayer, Julian, Boyata, and all that. They were all in the 30s, right? Now, obviously, that's a lot to do with style of play. It's not necessarily that those players were any worse or better than Scales at passing. A lot of it's to do with style, and we know that under Postecoglou, there was a massive leap forward in the volume of pack passing because it was a choice. He wanted his players to break lines, be more aggressive with the forward passing. And under Rodgers, that's continued. So the numbers went up under Postecoglou, but even Starfelt and Vickers in their pomp under Postecoglou, their pack passing score averaged about 53. Scales' score at the moment is 71. He is by far the most effective pack passing centre-back that we've had since I started records. Now, it may well be that some of his passes are not optimal in terms of the passing behind a player slightly or not to the player's best foot. He may still take a fraction of a second too long to pass sometimes. But in terms of functionally adding value to the team, there is no doubt that in terms of how, Postecoglou wanted to play, but how Rodgers wants to play, that passing out from the back by the centre-backs is something that Scales has really embraced and really contributes strongly to. And that's massive for Celtic. So I think this is a good news story. I think it's a very human story of someone who I think is just naturally improving with age, who's probably learning, whose improvement hasn't necessarily been off the scale. I wouldn't expect that. It's just been gradual but perceptible improvement in his play, which I love. I love that because that shows a fantastic attitude, and it shows a brilliant human being wanting to make the best of himself and the skills that he has. Maybe his age, that maturity that we talked about, maybe becoming a regular for Ireland, and by all accounts doing well for them, albeit as the left-sided of a 3, which I think is probably his optimal position. But still, he's doing the job. He's doing well. All of those things, matter. But God damn it, the most important thing anybody wants in their work is to feel valued and trusted. And I think Rodgers, I'm sure, makes Scales do that. So this is a good news story. And as is traditional, I do have a section of a poem for Liam Scales. This is just for Liam. After all the criticism that we've probably dished out to him over the last year and a half, he gets his own poem. The poem, I'm not going to read it all. Don't worry, don't all switch off now. It's only a segment of it.
Did you write this one yourself, Alan?
No, but funnily, it's called The Will to Win, and it's by a chap called Burton Bailey, who sounds like he ought to have one of the executive positions at Ibrox if they still did those things, which I know they don't.
It sounded like a Bertie Wooster sort of friendship.
He's got that sort of name. So anyway, the will to win. If you simply go after that thing that you want with all your capacity, strength and sagacity, faith, hope and confidence, stern pertinacity, if neither cold, poverty, famished and gaunt, nor sickness nor pain of body or brain can turn you from the thing that you want, if dogged and grim you besiege and beset it, you will get it. So well done, Liam Scales.
Yeah, here. I think well done, Liam Scales, and well done for that, Alan. That was lovely. One thing before James comes in to say something horrible, and just to keep this moment.
You know me well, Martin. You know me well.
Are you able to mute him, Martin? We should do that more often.
What I was going to say in terms of Scales as well, where I've been very impressed, he really seems to have that capacity to absorb and willingness to learn and adapt his game. And one thing in terms of, I suppose we go back to this eye test of watching him, I feel as if he's moving the ball more quickly when he gets it now and more simply, whereas at one stage he seemed to be trying to drive forward, then panic a little bit often, trying to pass it and losing possession or playing it behind people. And I think somewhere along the line someone's had a word and say, just keep it simple, do what you're good at, because he's actually a pretty good passer of the ball from the back. And I think he's really improved just by simplifying his game. So absolutely fair play to him. James?
Well, what I was going to say is that I've seen a different version of that poem, and it was plagiarized under a pen name. The title of it was "Get It Right Up You" by Enda Cole. So I think this whole segment should be titled "The Revenge of Enda Cole." So props to him as well. But in fairness, he has been using the private jet down to Australia and back. So I think he's got his due rewards for that. But his undying support of Liam Scales has turned out to be far more wise than Alan or my analysis over the last couple of seasons. So good on you, Enda. I said this last couple of weeks, I think. Is this idea of the scaling and how, between good coaching and dedicated, talented professionals, they're getting, like 98% or 99%. It's almost impossible as a human being to get 100% out of yourself because there's always something going on, niggling, or you didn't get enough sleep, or, there's all these things. And guys like him and Greg Taylor, like they have absolutely squeezed and are still squeezing every ounce of water out of the stone that they can get out of it. And that's it's a great thing to watch happen. It's such a fun thing to root for people that dedicate themselves and, perform like that. It's just are the conditions domestically, where they're doing that and thriving and almost glowing in the way they're thriving domestically. And then we go play Dortmund. And then you're like, yeah, I get reminded, like there are levels. And,
for sure.
Talent is a thing. Unfortunate for the vast majority of us Homo sapiens that lack it is, you get to envy at the people that have it. And so, yeah, my thinking when he started playing was if everything goes right, damn, he would be a great backup, like a depth center back where you have no qualms where if the head, if the first choice guy gets hurt for a couple of months, that, it's not going to cost us the league or even have any kind of jeopardy towards the performance of the team. I think he's even exceeded that a little bit. Like, I think he's, to the point where, some of this is because I'm not blown away by Trusty and his profile, but I've written and I've said I wouldn't be shocked if we spent $6 million for Liam Scales' backup.
It's his position to lose, really, isn't it?
That is as much a compliment to Liam Scales as it is, questioning the recruitment department and decision making of Celtic, because he's made it so it's not that easy to replace him. Clearly we've been able to spend £6 million for someone who's still questionable. And I think that is a question going into this weekend, is you would think the shirt is Liam Scales. But again, we go back to this issue of managers having big egos, and a manager with a big ego who spent 11 million on one guy and 6 million on another guy in a window that was owned by him. I have not seen it. This would not be uncharacteristic of managers across sports, where their guys end up getting a shirt because they own them. And I don't mean that, you know what I mean? Like, it's their decision making gets wrapped up in their own kind of ego type of thing. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think Scales has been that good and has the trust of Rodgers to a degree that it would actually surprise me. Wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if it's Trusty and Carter Vickers, assuming Carter Vickers is fit.
Just to pick up on that, James, and this is to both of you, really. Probably come to you first, Alan, on this one. Given the injuries that Carter Vickers has clearly been suffering from, and they seem a bit ongoing, unfortunately, a lot of discomfort, especially with the toe. Would you go with Carter Vickers if he seems fit against Aberdeen, or would you save him for the European game? Because I'd be a bit nervous going into the game if he's coming in without a bit of match practice.
As a rule, I think if you decide to play a player who's not fit and therefore a risk of further injury and harm to them, you're destroying two people's confidences. You're destroying the confidence of the player who's injured, and you're destroying the person who's the backup, who you clearly feel you'd rather play somebody who's hamstrung, metaphorically, than them. So I never, rarely ever can kind of support that, really. So to me, if Carter Vickers is any doubt as to his ability to perform is optimal for 90 minutes, then we should play Trusty for sure.
Okay, and James,
that would go for the European game as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the only exclusion I make is the one-off one, which is you're going into a European Cup final, and I've even said this when I've been very critical in the past about how Tierney's injury period at Celtic was treated, which part of it, a material part of that, was under Rodgers in his first tenure. Things like taking painkillers repeatedly for long durations. It's just dumb. It's just dumb from a human level. It's dumb from an asset management perspective. But I do make the caveat is, well, if it's a final and you get the offseason to recover, all right, shoot me up, Doc. Like that's how I would take it.
Yeah.
And I get it from a player perspective. But, neither of these two games are anywhere in the neighborhood of that. They're not seminal games where a player should be risking any kind of significant long-term health issues by taking pain injection medication. And that's different. I'm not talking about, cortisone shots that are designed to hopefully deal with, if he's got some kind of inflammation issue because of a stubbed toe or, something these athletes get that I can't relate to when you get impact, stress fractures and all these other things from running a lot. So, but yeah, I'm in agreement with Alan in the sense that get the guy healthy, because these kinds of issues, stress fracture or whatever, if you're dealing with toes, it's usually something like that. And you don't get better until it's healed. And the only way it gets healed is you got to rest. And if you're trying to shortcut it with pain medication and anti-inflammatories, it never works. So you're dealing with pain thresholds for a period of time. And it's just like, that's usually not smart. So get him fit, however long that's going to take, and, play him when he's ready, and he's going to stay fit on that injury, for the duration. And, as an outsider, who knows whether that is where it is. And the other part of this is you have some players whose mentality is different, where they'd run through a brick wall. They want to play no matter what. Like it sounds like Tierney's was during his tenure at Celtic, probably not unsurprisingly. So even within a squad, the composition of players, you get different personalities and mentalities who have their own thoughts on how to deal with these things, which is another reason why you need somebody like Tisdale to implement best practices as a footballing operation, because you can't leave these decisions solely to managers and players, because if you do, you end up with shorter term thinking sometimes that can be bad.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, I suppose, that we can afford to rest Carter Vickers, because the team that we're playing on Wednesday is only 8th in Serie A, so clearly not a tremendous threat to us. I wish. I know you guys are going to be getting into this in a lot of depth. I'm really looking forward to watching that, with Laura. I've kind of taken it upon myself to frighten myself by looking all our European opponents in as much detail as possible, and some thoughts from me, because I thought, well, I was quite happy before the Slovan-Bratislava match until I listened to you guys and you terrified me. So I thought, right, Atalanta. They didn't have a great start to the season because they had a lot of injuries. They're still having a few injury problems. I think that impacted on their defensive record. They score a lot of goals. They've lost a lot of goals. They played a few academy players. They've got a terrific academy. In the Champions League, they haven't lost a goal yet. They drew 0-0 with Arsenal. They missed a penalty in that game. They had a 3-0 victory away to Shakhtar. The game was played in Germany at Schalke's stadium, but 3-0 away, and it could have been so much more. Just a general overview before I quickly come to you guys to finish off. They dominate possession, they play out from the back, they really press the goalkeeper and defence. The movement was superb that I've seen. They're really cohesive. When I watched Dortmund, I'd seen them about 4 times, and I was kind of looking at areas with Dortmund thinking, oh God, we could get at them here and there, but they're so cohesive. They're not as direct as Dortmund, but their movement and their rotation and filling in positions, switching positions, their passing was crisp. Some of the play, let's be honest, their whole team looked really good, but the ones that stood out for me, a little bit of good news is that Kosanu is likely to miss the game. He's injured, the Ivorian central defender sweeper. he looked something else. He looked absolutely amazing, wonderful, elegant, fast footballer, breaking from the back and staying up front. The downside is that it looks like, unless we hear differently, Lookman, who's the obvious threat that I think most Celtic fans would be aware of, he scored a hat-trick in the Europa League final last season. He's the outlet, he's the pace, he switches position, he drifts from left wing to centre forward. He really dribbles effectively. Retagu, if I'm pronouncing it properly, then the Italy international. Oh, guess what? He scored for Italy in in midweek as well. He scored 7 goals last season for Genoa. He's already scored 7 goals in Serie A. He drops deep. He can play incisive passes. He looks really confident, really on fire. I think the key guy is the Brazilian Ederson in midfield. I thought he was tireless. He was box to box, a great ball retention. His passes were fast, they were crisp. He can score. He can find space. He covers well. He gets up and down, dominates the midfield. There were a few others, Samardžić played a false 9 very effectively before they brought Retegui on to partner up with Lookman in one of the games I was watching. And another couple of maybe lesser known players to an extent, just to finish him. Bellanova on the right. Covers so much ground. He's a goal threat. He's got great height at set pieces. And some may be aware of Zappacosta, who played with Chelsea. He's 32 years old, a very experienced player, and having a bit of an Indian summer by the look of it, really, with him at right back. He's bombing up and down, great crosser of the ball, etc. So I'm hoping that on Tuesday, when I watch the programme, you guys are going to reassure me somewhat and talk about how tactically we can combat this team, because I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, it's funny. They're such a different animal than Dortmund.
Yes.
Using one of my dopey analogies or metaphors. I don't know. You're the educated man, Martin. You can straighten me out.
You're far too kind, James.
Which one I'm using here? You can tell me offline once and humiliate me in person. Offline is, Dortmund was more like jazz. And this is going to be more like a Mozart symphony. And, very kind of distinct patterns of play, very well coached, recruitment aligned with how they play. Like they are getting, I talk about this smart organization model of alignment of resources with all of these factors, recruitment and, everything. And they're an epitome of that. But their talent levels are not in the same neighborhood as some of the guys that we just faced against Dortmund.
Yeah.
Like, they have good players. They don't have like jaw dropping, I'm going to crap my pants when I see this guy level of talent. So yeah. it's that different aspect. But yeah, they're going to present a whole different kettle of fish. And but with that opportunity. Because they're not invulnerable. I mean, we're not going into like the horrible wedding of those two things, like which is Manchester City or that level where you've got everything lined up and the best players in the world. And it's just like, fuck, man, there are slivers, or even I would say larger than slivers of hope going into the game. But yeah, they're really good, and they have a great manager, and just they're a fun team to analyze because they are so smartly run. So yeah, we'll have fun doing that on Tuesday.
At least they're not kind of going to run directly at goal against us, which might be helpful. Alan, what's your thoughts? Maybe they will.
Well, they tend to pass very fast towards goal.
That's very fast towards goal and draws out of position. Yeah. Very much so.
Very direct. A lot of pressing. Everything's done incredible speed. But as James says, with that, that is it's a difficult way to play, actually. And although they've recruited smartly, you are talking about, as James said, sort of probably that second level of talent that in terms of Champions League, not the sort of top level of talent. So it can break down because it's so, I don't want to say helter skelter because that sounds disorganized. It's organized chaos.
It's far from disorganized.
Very
really
organized at great pace. But it doesn't always come off, right? So we'll cling to that one. But yeah, we'll get into that on Tuesday.
Pretty quickly though, don't they?
Yeah, we'll get into that on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's super. Just like to say before I finish, I'd like to wish the Tommy Gemmell Community Trust all the very best. They're walking from Craignuke Wishaw, Tommy's birthplace, hometown, into the stadium. There's a lot of sponsorship there, but they will be collecting, and it's to raise funds for a statue for the great man who, of course, as we all know, scored in 2 European Cup finals. That's Champions League finals, kids, just in case you don't know. So I'd like to wish them all the very best and the support for that. Guys, I'd like to thank you both very much again for your input here, and obviously thank Gavin again. Really, really valuable. Thanks everyone for joining us again, and remember, whatever platform that you're on, do feel free to subscribe and like, and do please join us again next week. Thanks so much. Goodbye.